All right, class, we are on the last objective for the unit. So we are almost done with thinking geographically. So let's take a look at regional analysis today. So you need to be able to describe different ways that geographers define regions. So first, regions are defined on the basis of one or more unifying characteristic or on patterns of activity. Types of regions include formal, functional, and perceptual. So we'll go over those here in just a sec. Regional boundaries are transitional and often contested and overlapping. And then finally, geographers apply regional analysis at local, national, and global scales. So these are the regions that you all need to know for the AP exam. I'm sure, hopefully you guys know at least some of these. But in general, this is what you will see maybe in reference on some questions or maybe in some of the answer choices and things like that. So again, kind of like coming back to scales of analysis, here we have local at the smallest scale, then going to national, regional, and then all the way up to global. So regions are defined as one or more unifying characteristics or patterns of activity. So the characteristic that unifies an area can be a human characteristic like language or government or maybe a common history, or it can be physical geography, such as like mountain ranges or desert areas, things like that. So we have formal, functional, and then vernacular or perceptual regions. So the example here, again, US-centric. We have the different franchises for football, American football. So of course, Texas is pretty dominated by the Cowboys. Like they're basically America's team. So that would be a cultural or a human element. So looking at formal regions, these are united by one or more specific traits that deals with economic, social, political, or environmental factors. So these are things that have maybe more defined boundaries. So for instance, political tends to be the most common example for formal regions. Things like where you have like the dividing line from city to city, that would be formal, right? That would be very firm, or from country to country. Economic, meaning maybe like the type of currency that's used in that particular place, and so on. So for currency, here we have an example of the European Union. The commonality is using the euro, so that would be a formal economic region. For social and cultural formal regions, here we have example of religion. So for the Islamic world, here we have a map that shows where we have that region where that religion is predominantly practiced, right? So this is where we see the majority of people practicing Islam, or at least maybe practicing it officially, maybe because it's the country's like official religion. Then we have political regions, like I mentioned. So the example that we have here is Europe, that has the specific lines that separate country to country. And then we have environmental regions such as the Sahara Desert. And there's a lot of other landforms that would be considered a formal environmental region. Then we have functional regions. So these are organized around a central node or a focal point, and the relationship is typically based around either economics, travel, or communication. One of the best ways to remember this, I think, has to do with things that are tied together to a central place. So if we think about New York City, right, you have New York City proper, like the main area, but then you have this, network of public transport that brings in people from the surrounding area. So then you have what is called the New York metro area, right? That is a functional region, and people will go in and out of the city or of New York proper to their jobs or to go shopping or different things like that. So another example is television markets that has to do with like public TV stations where local news might broadcast. So this is organized around a node or focal point where that particular station is, and will then transmit that to that kind of somewhat local area. Some of these areas are pretty big, but that's considered a functional region. Then we have perceptual, sometimes called vernacular, but these are based on people's perceptions or perspectives of a particular place. So these are informal. There are no specific lines for these. This has to do with sense of place and cultural identity. So even somebody's thought of like the South in the US or the West Coast can vary from person to person, might include more or less space. Sorry, those are the pups. So yeah, like I was mentioning, the South, there's different ways that people measure that, right? For instance, right, my home area right there. I wouldn't really consider my area from the South, but some people do, right? Some people do consider that as part of the South. So regional boundaries sometimes are transitional, contested, or overlapping. So, like I mentioned, right, I don't really consider my particular area part of the South and the way that people think of it perceptually. Whereas other people might. These things are more fluid, sometimes they overlap. So, here are some examples. There's no clean cut boundary to some regions. That just happens to be the case, unless it's formal. That's a little different. So again, here are some examples of transitional, contested, or overlapping boundaries. Some of these are more contentious than others. For instance, let's say like Mexico. Is it North America, South America, Central America? And the way that it is thought about or where they place themselves, that can change depending on what characteristic they're looking at. Are they looking at purely geographic or environmental, or are they looking at also maybe economic or socioeconomic as well? So that can change. And we are now at the end of the unit. So good job, guys. Make sure that you all review your notes. Make sure you're taking your mastery checks, and best of luck on your unit exam.